All right, we continue our reviews of the WWE Rivals series, the new season. Here, we've already done a review for the Triple H versus The Rock episode. That was the season opener for the new season of this series. And now we get to Jake Roberts versus Randy Savage. Catching up on this one now. And, this one I thought I probably enjoyed this one more than I did the Triple H Rock one. And I'll tell you why in just a second. But the panel itself, as always, I think is one where they add a little something to this, but like they're not the featured sort of attraction here, and I don't know that the panel really does a whole lot to get you invested in these. They just kind of repeat the stuff that you probably already know, but I thought this one was a little bit, maybe again, more interesting maybe than the Triple H Rock one, just because you did have interesting points, I thought, from Kevin Nash, who was on the panel for this one. JBL was as well. Those two guys are never two to kind of hold back their thoughts on certain, again, things, whether they're put in these scenarios where they're doing, these kind of documentary style interviews and those kind of things. But you had Freddie Prinze Jr., of course, leading the way. As always, as I said, Nash, JBL, Bailey, Natalia were the other two on there. Basic stuff, but hey, they're the panel, and that's just the way this series works. You're going to get the panel kind of leading the way on these. But look, it was pointed out in the comments on the previous one, and one of the reasons why I didn't love the Triple H versus Rock one was because you didn't get anything new from The Rock. Like, it was just all old footage and old interviews from the archives talking about, his history with Triple H and all that. And, of course, you weren't going to get anything new here from Randy Savage. Of course, he passed away many years ago now. Blaney Poffo was involved in this, and we know he recently passed away as well. But I thought Jake was kind of the star here in terms of you could listen to Jake describe anything, and he's going to make it compelling because that's who Jake Roberts is. And the voice, all the things that were kind of pointed out in here as to why this storyline works so well, because it's Jake and the way that Jake goes about things and how his character worked. It just made this kind of a special rivalry. And this is one, too, unlike the Triple H versus The Rock situation, where this isn't one that's talked about all the time. It's first of all, you're further removed from it now, this many years. I mean, this was, the point of this feud was late 91 into early 92. So you're talking 30 plus years versus the Triple H Rock stuff, which was, back starting 97, 98 and such, but has kind of carried through since then, as we know, and has been done in different iterations since that point. But, again, this was really all about how personal this feud got between Jake Roberts and Randy Savage, and maybe more so kind of based on their characters and the storyline that was in place than anything kind of off the screen. But there is, the one story we've heard over the years that we'll get to in a second, I think is pretty fascinating, and it always has been, just based on the reaction to the big moment of this feud. But again, you kind of talking about it, and Nash was someone who pointed out kind of just the uniqueness of Jake Roberts' voice, right? And we mentioned it a second ago. It's just the way the guy speaks. He's got that gravelly type voice. It's the cadence that he speaks with, and did it in a whisper so that you would have no choice but to listen. Now, he wasn't just, talking very, very low, but Jake was making it clear that every word that came out of his mouth, you were going to really have to pay attention because of the way he was saying it. And, of course, that set up quite a dynamic with Randy Savage, who also had one of the most unique deliveries you could find in professional wrestling. And so it was because of how well these two guys sort of presented their characters and how well they got over because of just, again, the unique nature of them. It made for all the elements you needed to create kind of that perfect feud. And, Hogan talked about kind of even at this time, right? Like, think about this. This is late 90s, early, again, 92, as you get into kind of the culmination of the feud. But talking about Jake's promos, like in this, of course, you go back into the late 80s too with this, when Jake was there, of course. But he went kind of down a road that many people weren't going down at the time. We weren't having kind of those dark side type promos, those kind of things. But like Jake went down that. He wasn't afraid to sort of explore it. And we know, of course, since then, I mean, Jake and all the things that have been written and documentaries that have been done just about kind of Jake's upbringing and just the stuff throughout his life, right? So it's not a surprise that maybe that was something that was explored through his character. It's just, you have that aspect of Jake's character playing off of the charisma of Randy Savage. And, that's where you add the Elizabeth dynamic to it. And that just made things not just within this feud, but really things completely different for Randy Savage, like in the way you sort of see him as an on-screen character, because now he has Miss Elizabeth, the first lady of wrestling here, and how that sort of changes the presentation and all of this other stuff. You did get some old footage in here from Gene Okerlund, Dusty Rhodes from like 2014, and just talking about playing up something that we have always known, the jealousy aspect of Randy Savage when it came to Elizabeth and all this other stuff. And that fed into the rivalry, the story here between Jake and Savage. Of course, at the time, we had just saw Randy Savage lose that match to the Ultimate Warrior at, WrestleMania 7. And, that kind of is your retirement match, and you get kind of the angle and stuff afterwards, with Sherry and Elizabeth and all of this, and talking about how that was really a rough time for Randy Savage. And of course, if you have read the stuff over the years about him, he was pissed. Like, he did not, it was an insult. And Lanny Poffo brought that up. Like, he did not want to be taken out of the ring. But he loses that match. He goes to commentary, kind of transitions into that. And this was, again, kind of that era where WWE's moving away from some of these older guys. You had some younger guys starting to step up and be put in those more premier positions, but it wasn't everyone. And Savage felt like, he had a lot more to give. And Bret Hart here talking about how he knew that Randy Savage would wrestle again. Of course, he would for many years after that. But yeah, so you get kind of the dynamic of, okay, Savage is removed from the mix. Jake's still doing his thing. But Savage is kind of off in commentary land. Like, he's not really a huge factor. And, you have kind of the wedding that gets built up with Elizabeth. That's in August of 91. They do the thing at SummerSlam. Of course, the match made in heaven. That's one half of the match made in hell, where you had the match with Hogan and Warrior teaming up against Slaughter and Adnan and Mustafa. But that's kind of the big draw here, right, is the big wedding. And we always expect things to go wrong with weddings in wrestling, but it didn't here. It's your normal wedding between Randy Savage and Elizabeth. I don't want to call it normal since it happened on television in WWE, but, one of the easier ones to get through without all the shenanigans and everything. So, and that brings another kind of added investment from the fans, too, at that point, because they're like, okay, we get the wedding from Savage and Elizabeth, so now you're fully invested in this couple. And again, that adds another dynamic to Randy Savage's on-screen persona, right? And so then comes the moment, right? One of two big moments in this whole deal. They do the reception, and Jake had kind of been, prodding Savage and stuff to this point, because again, he's on commentary, all those things. They do the reception. You get the memorable visual of they're going through the gifts for their wedding and all this. You've got everybody kind of sitting around, eating cake, whatever. And so Liz goes to open up the box, and what comes out of the box, right? It's the snake. The snake comes out of the box. Jake goes after her with it, and that at that point, it makes Jake the ultimate heel. Not only is he going after Savage, right? He goes after the man's now wife at the reception by putting a snake in one of the gifts. So that takes it up one notch, and trust me, it's going to continue to go up from there. And kind of looking here. That's where it was one of the things where, okay, Savage has been, he's barred. He can't participate. Like, so because he lost the retirement match, he's barred. He can't, wrestle. Basically, that was part of the story. And so Jake can continue to just keep prodding him and prodding him and prodding. There's nothing Savage can do. He can do whatever he wants to Elizabeth or anybody, because Savage can't get in the ring with him, right? He can't solve things in the ring as professional wrestlers would do, right? He can't do that. And so then you get the petitions, and they talked about even here, and if you go back, you can kind of read some stuff on it, just sort of the overwhelming response that WWE got to sort of the reinstate Randy Savage. You've got fans chanting it at shows and all this other stuff. They wanted to reinstate him because they wanted to see him get his hands on Jake the Snake Roberts for coming after his wife with a snake. And so that kind of adds that extra layer to it. And again, just kind of the reaction. It was great to see Sean Mooney was part of this. Sean Mooney, great interviewer back in the day, I thought. Added a lot to the WWF during this time period, with Gene and other people as well. But I always enjoyed Sean Mooney's work. So it was good to see him in this, kind of giving his thoughts. And then he kind of asked the big question. And this was the question, he's right, that people were asking for the longest time. It's like, well, what happens if Jake snake bites someone, right? Because even you're watching this time period, you're thinking the same thing. You're like, what happens if that snake gets out of that bag and it goes over and bites someone? What happens? What are they going to do about that, right? And that was always my thing, is I'm watching them like, even when Jake had not brought the snake out of the bag, I'm looking over and making sure that snake's still in there, right? I would be if I was in the front row in any of these shows. And I'm looking around and I see that bag over there and the snake's there. I'm like, oh, hold on a second. My eye's going to be on that snake the entire time. I don't care what's going on in the ring. I got to make sure that thing's not getting out. And so Mooney brings that up. He's like, well, everybody asked that question. Well, that, of course, is when WWE took it a step further and said, okay, now we're talking about we're actually going to have the snake bite someone. And it's going to be Randy Savage. And the story here, and this is where this was the scene stealer, I guess you could say. And I know Jake has probably mentioned this before, but this was kind of the highlight, I thought, of the documentary. And that was talking about Jake retelling the story of they go forward with this idea that it's pitched. They're going to go forward with it. Jake was all for it, right? But he said Randy Savage did not trust him. And what does Savage do? Yes, what any normal person, I think, would do. He basically, and look, Savage's paranoia is well documented, but he talks about how Savage was just asking him, look, Jake, is that venom really removed? Has it been devenomized? And he wanted to know, like, he's asking that question. Jake's like, well, of course it has. I wouldn't be handling the thing if it didn't. But Savage is not convinced. He's not convinced that this snake has had, the venom sacs removed. He's not convinced of it. So Savage is telling Jake, hey, how about this? How about you let the snake bite you first? And so Jake's like, great. I mean, this is where, again, you have to watch it because Jake had a great impression, a great response here to what Savage was asking him to do. And the snake, bites Jake, right? Jake's like, all right, let him. And so he bites him. But that's not good enough. Savage is like, no. He's like, stay there. Don't move. Don't take anything. Just stay right there. Like, Savage wants to make sure that nothing's happening to Jake after the snake bites him. And so that's where we get to the big moment. November 23rd, 1992, the edition of Superstars, where Jake calls out Savage, makes all the comments about hiding behind Elizabeth's skirt, and he brings up Roddy Piper's skirt and all this stuff, and how Savage is basically hiding from him. Well, the Macho Man is snapped at that point, right? And so Jake ties Savage in the ropes. The snake bites him. And these, again, you just think about it. It's the lasting visual of this feud is the thought of like this cobra having its, mouth just wrapped around Randy Savage's arm. And Mooney recalls, like, going back, he's like, there are people backstage that are asking the question, is that snake going to come off there? Is he going to let go? And then you see Jake kind of fiddling around with the snake at the time. And so Jake's like, that thing's not coming off. Like, and the thing just keeps biting Savage. You got the blood coming out and all this stuff on the arm. And to this day, there are still people I know that have asked that question. Like, was this real? And someone said, I don't remember who it was in here. Maybe it was Jake. Maybe someone else was like, it may have been one of the panel members, actually. It's like, that's not a working snake. Like, that's a real snake. Like, that wasn't a Hollywood stuntman there with the snake. Like, that thing was real. We're talking about the Cobra here. And so just kind of playing that off and, Jake kind of able to finally pull the snake off. Again, you got the blood everywhere. And that's where, they kind of go into Cody. Cody Rhodes had a great line here. He's like, how could they be sure that there is no venom whatsoever in this snake, right? How could they be that sure that there's nothing in this snake that's going to cause an issue? And we'll get to that shortly. But, Jimmy Hart's bringing up, like, that showed you Randy Savage would do anything for his character. Of course, they had a long history, Savage and Jimmy Hart. But, I mean, Cody's right. It's like, talking about how it just speaks to the sacrifice that Randy Savage had, but also kind of the lunacy. Like, really, you're going to do this? Like, this is what he was willing to do, knowing that there was that chance. And Undertaker, talking about people wondering, was that real? And he's like, yes. Like, their kids crying in the crowd, all this other stuff. Like, I don't even remember my initial reaction when I first saw this, but I'm sure at the time I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like, Savage is done for. Like, he's out of here. Like, he just got bit by a snake. And, then Hogan brings up the story. This has also been kind of documented over the years that afterwards, Savage gets this fever of 104. So he gets the snake bite. he gets the fever, the chills. Paffo's talking about it. And okay, like what's going to happen here? Maybe it wasn't devenomized, right? But then that's where Lanny Poffo recalls and says, hey, Savage gets to 104-degree fever, but the snake dies a couple days later. So you think about this, right? Like all this stuff they do, Savage gets his fever, the snake dies a couple days later. And, Savage had told Poffo, this was the great line, the snake was devenomized, but I wasn't. That was the quote that Savage gave to Lanny Poffo. So it's like, what an interesting dynamic. And that made the feud. Let's call it what it is, because it took it to a level we had never seen before, right? And Jack Tunney winds up banning. This is another great line here. You're like, you go back and watch this footage from Jack Tunney, and he gives the announcement, and it's hard to keep a straight face because you're like, Tunney says the WWF is officially banning the Cobra and all reptiles from ringside. So it's like we're putting a ban on reptiles in 1992 in the WWF. No reptiles ringside. So again, just kind of speaks to the time period. Savage gets reinstated finally. They have the series of matches there. And Savage cuts some great promos in here, talking about kind of the snake bite was one thing, but seeing Elizabeth crying was another. You get that incredible Jake response promo where he's talking about how it made him feel and how it's, giving him goosebumps and all this other stuff, seeing the snake doing this to Savage. And it's like just all this stuff, man, the tension building and building between these two guys. They have their, match at this Tuesday in Texas, which was kind of a short match, but it was played up that way where it was full go. Where Savage was just all over him. Savage gets the win, but Jake keeps it going, hits a couple DDTs after the match. And that's where Elizabeth gets in the middle of them. And Jake winds up grabbing Elizabeth. You want to talk about something that could not be done today. Probably the Snake Night's not being done today. And also Jake kind of giving a little bit of a slap to Elizabeth is not being done today either. So a product of the era, as we know. But that kind of sent things even further, escalating this feud. And they also tell the story of how Elizabeth's family had not sort of been smartened up to the business at the time or whatever. And they're talking about how it was such a different era. They're protecting the business, and like they wanted, they hated on Savage and all this other stuff because she just got slapped right in the middle of the ring. And Jake just did that. And so family went nuts, said they would shoot Savage, all this other stuff. So like you think about it, it's the time period too. It's just the nature of where the business was. And you have a feud like this that takes things to a different level. And not just once, we're talking multiple times. And so such a fascinating thing. And so again, eventually they work to the match, Saturday night's main event. Savage wins. And you kind of get that, you get the lasting visual after the match where this is where the feud kind of changes a little bit. Savage wins. Elizabeth comes out. They're all happy. They get ready to come to the back, and you've got this compelling television where Jake is now behind the curtain that leads to the ring, right? He's got this chair, and basically, Jake's not done. Even though Savage beat him and all this, Jake's going to keep this thing going. So Jake's got the chair, and they do the cutbacks back and forth between here's Elizabeth and Savage walking towards the back, and here's Jake just waiting with this chair. He's ready. He said, I'm going to hit the next person that comes through here, whether it's Elizabeth, whether it's Savage. Jake's going to haul off with a chair because he's pissed off, right? And then you get the visual. They come through the curtain, and Jake swings the chair. And who is there? The Undertaker is the one that stops Jake from hitting the chair. And, of course, that sent the Undertaker in a different direction. They'd face off at WrestleMania 8 at that point. And, of course, Savage wins the title. He beats Flair in that match to win the championship. And that, takes the full story kind of full circle, where Savage goes from being someone who's taken out of the mix. He's reinstated for this unbelievable feud with Jake Roberts. And then from there, he becomes the WWF champion again, and kind of what this did for his career. And, even Poffo kind of talking about how Savage told him that Jake was sort of the greatest mind he had seen in wrestling, after working with him and all this other stuff. And I think the panel kind of ties it all up. And this is where it is good to kind of, have that just to spell it out for you. But this was kind of what it's all about in wrestling, right? You have that great hero, you have that great villain. And this was something where you connected all the elements of the, relationship, just who Jake was, like the character, all this other stuff. And like, it made for this the perfect story of the hero versus the villain. Savage was the clear hero. Jake was the clear villain. There was no in between. And that made this become such a legendary sort of rivalry, which when you think about it, like this wasn't a long feud. If you just look at the timeline, right? from, again, late 91 into early 92. It was not a long time period that this had taken place, but it's kind of the trajectory of the two characters, too, and like what they had built up to this point in their career, and how now you set them off on this collision course together, and you just make something that is never going to be forgotten with, again, a couple of key moments, but really just, again, sort of the characters. It's the all about that. It's the story and the characters, not just the in-ring stuff. Like, it is how they mesh together, and these were two that were so unique in the history of professional wrestling that it had no choice but to work, and again, they took it to a level that we had just not seen. So if you're asking, should you watch this, right? If you were a fan of this era and you just want some nostalgia, like I found this, honestly, I found this easier to watch probably than the Triple H Rock one. And it's because I think hearing Jake tell the story, I found more intriguing than anything else. But it's also, knowing that we are talking about Jake Roberts and Randy Savage here. Like, these are two legends too, just like Triple H and The Rock. But you get Jake's perspective on this. And I just thought, it's that footage. It's seeing that old footage of how this whole thing came together and just how memorable of a storyline this was, right? This wasn't just two guys that feuded throughout their career. It was a moment in time where you had two guys that just built up this special, special rivalry, and the visuals of the snakebite, all that stuff, the snake coming out of the box of the reception. It was unlike anything we had seen. And so I think that coolness aspect of it, it's 45 minutes. It's shorter than the Triple H and Rock one. So I think it was like 42 minutes was the runtime or whatever, because it's an hour long, right? Minus commercials. So 42-minute runtime. It's an easy watch. Again, if you're looking for some fun to go back to this era and relive this rivalry, is there a ton of new information? As usual with these, no, but there was still a lot of good stuff, I thought. And I think, again, I could listen to Jake tell the stories of his characters and these kind of rivalries anytime, just because it's Jake. And when that camera's on, he's on. And I thought he did a good job in this to kind of tell you the story of Jake Roberts versus Randy Savage. So there you go. There's some thoughts on this edition of WWE Rivals. Of course, we'll continue reviewing some of these. As I said, I've reviewed the Triple H Rock one. Also, I've done the Randy Orton A&E biography. I got to get to the Sergeant Slaughter one next. And then we'll have more stuff to come as well. I'm going to start adding in Dark Side of the Ring. I know they did one on John Tenta that I'm looking forward to watching as well. So we'll have more of these. And, of course, all the other stuff going on in the world of professional wrestling, which doesn't just include documentaries. We'll have more stuff here on the channel as well. So hit that subscribe button, new channel. Enjoy talking wrestling. WrestleMania 40 on the way. AEW into its new season. A lot of fun stuff here on the channel. So appreciate you guys watching. And if you've already watched it, let me know what you thought of the WWE Rivals edition, Jake Roberts versus Randy Savage.